identical bill, which was introduced and done in the Judiciary Committee. So this bill is redundant to that issue, and I can either make a motion if you'd like to vote on it, or I would make a request that we withdraw the request for introduction, and without objection, we would do the same reverse process as we would normally do on introducing a bill. Does that make sense, what I'm asking, Representative Miller?
Makes sense. Curious, who did request it?
Well, it was a request from the Insurance Department. I think, Mr. Modisett, did you happen to make the bill request? So
He's good with your statement?
That is a great question. I thank you for that. And Mr. Modisett, would you care to speak to that for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lee Modisett, Kansas Insurance Department. To add just a little bit to that, after the suit was settled, we were instructed that it would be our responsibility to bring a bill to resolve this issue. There was a bill that had been introduced previous session in Judiciary that had taken no action that carried over in the Judiciary, on the House side anyway, heard that bill a second time this session. We have a companion bill in the Senate, and so from our perspective, we're good to go.
So a valid question, and one that I had gone through as well, but I appreciate the question. Is there any question or objection on where we are? Any questions of what we're trying to do at this point? Or are you vague enough, or you trust the things that myself and Representative Miller tried to confuse everyone with? Anyway, simply taking out a dual bill that is there, and you can't have the same topic in two committees. Is that correct, Mr. Revisor? We have the same topic in two committees, and we need to correct that. I'm requesting that we withdraw 2867. Is there an objection? And without objection, the request will be withdrawn. So chance to do that in reverse order. Thanks for bearing with that process. Yes, Representative Neighbor.
One quick question. If this had been on the books before, are we assured that this is going to be heard in Judiciary? If this, okay. Yeah, it's kind of up in the air on that one.
I'm sorry, Representative Miller, you'll need to use your mic for that. Anyway, so thanks for everyone on the inside of a joke that's not that terribly funny, but I appreciate the humor. All right, with that, thanks committee for crossing that T. We will move into our first bill hearing, which is House Bill 2509, and if the revisor would give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee. House Bill 2509 would amend the definition of member for the Deferred Retirement Option Program, or the DROP, that is within the Kansas Police and Firemen's Retirement System, KP&F. And this would expand the definition of member to include any member of the Kansas Police and Firemen's Retirement System, so that anybody currently in KP&F could then also participate in the DROP program. Under current law, a member of DROP can only be a trooper, examiner, or officer of the Kansas Highway Patrol, or an agent of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. So again, this would just simply expand it and allow anybody that's within the current KP&F membership to become a DROP member as well.
Thank you. Are there questions of the revisor? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I remember this bill from a couple years ago, and at that time, this was sold to us that there was just a very few, 8 to 10 people that this affected. And I'd like to hear representative from the Capers about this maybe, but there was just a very few people that were in this process because we needed them. They were very special people. And now we're opening this up to everybody. So I just had a little challenge of those numbers. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as the DROP was originally enacted, it was a pilot for just the Highway Patrol, and like I said, those troopers, examiners, officers, and then a few years ago, the legislature did expand it to KBI agents as well, kind of for the same, I think some retention issues and things like that to keep people around. But I mean, I don't know how many folks this would affect now. That's probably a question for Capers. But I mean, it could be potentially anybody within the current KP&F pool.
Thank you. Other questions for the reviser? Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there a method established under the statute, because I don't see it, in terms of moving the retirement system from what they're currently on to capers? Like, what happens to the retirement that they currently have accrued?
This doesn't affect anything with their retirement benefit. This is already somebody that would be within the Kansas Police and Firemen's retirement system. DROP is sort of a program in which somebody that has reached the normal retirement age under KPNF could then keep working and then enter to DROP. And then what would happen is the retirement benefit that they would have received if they had actually retired and left service gets set each monthly. Retirement benefit, an amount equal to that, gets deposited in a DROP account for the period of time within the time they're in the DROP, which is anywhere from 3 to 5 years. At the end of their DROP period, that account that's stating over here that all those benefits have been collected plus some interest, if it meets some requirements, gets distributed at the time they actually then leave the DROP, leave employment, and then they have that kind of that extra chunk of money there to either roll over into a retirement, another retirement account, or they can take a lump sum distribution. So it doesn't affect any of their actual the calculation of a retirement benefit. It's just
Representative Riley.
And just a review from what you just mentioned, I remember when we first did this bill, it was only like for 2 years, and then we extended a little longer, was it not? It seems like it was just a couple years, because these were very special people that was going to be very hard to replace these people. They were in, labs or whatever. Some of them worked back and forth in Missouri, but these were like hard to replace people that we were doing. So was that not right? It was like 2 or 3 years originally.
I believe it was maybe 4 years originally. It was sort of kind of that pilot program, and then the legislature extended it as well. So I think I'd have to look back, but I think it's through 2025, but I think that's right.
Representative Smith.
When a person reaches retirement age, can they be turned down for their DROP program?
Well, it would depend on the participating employer if they would, it's sort of the employee and the employer would have to agree to go into DROP, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And some of the questions will be good ones for Director Conroy as well. But if there are other questions for the reviser, seeing none, thank you for the overview. Next, we would touch on the fiscal note and welcome to committee Adam Prophet. Were you talking on the fiscal note for this one? Or are you talking on now? Oh, okay, on the next, that makes sense. I'm with you there. So, sorry, I got my wires crossed on which one. I'll look forward to that next one as well. But Director Conroy, is the fiscal note fairly well encapsulated in the information you have? Welcome to committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and certainly pleased to be here to talk about the DROP program. And again, as David has explained, the DROP program, that Deferred Retirement Option Program, is currently sort of a pilot program, currently just for the Kansas Highway Patrol and the KBI agents. And so, and the way the DROP works, and I think you may have my testimony, on the very last page of that is a little flyer that we've put together to help those KPNF members that are eligible to participate in DROP. And if you want to follow along, there's an example there. But the way the DROP works is, first, the employer has to agree to it. So the employer says yes. And also, the member has to be retirement eligible. And for KPNF, for most of them, it's age 50 with 25 years of service, or age 55 with 20 years of service, or age 50 with 15 years of service. And so they have to be eligible for normal retirement. Employer has to say yes, and then they can enter into this DROP program from anywhere from 3 up to 5 years. And so during that time then, So we would calculate what their monthly retirement benefit was going to be as if they walked out the door at that point, but they're going to keep working. So rather than paying them in this example on that attachment that I said, Joe's, AKA Joe's monthly benefit would have been $2,580. And so that monthly benefit amount would be paid into this drop account while he continues to work, while he continues to pay employee contributions during that drop period while he's still working, 7.15%, and the employer continues to pay employer contributions as if he was, a normal active member. And so it's about 23%. So at the end of the drop period, then the member who ultimately retires, then at that point, separates from service, he gets that accumulated monthly benefit, that, in this case, $2,580 a month for 3 years, plus some interest, and there's some parameters on that, but he or she would probably get some interest on that, and it would be paid in a lump sum to the individual at that time. And of course, we can pay it to them. There'd be some tax withholding, or they could roll it over into a qualified plan, a 457, an IRA, or something like that. And so that would happen at that point. I guess they could continue to work, but they wouldn't receive, no more money would go into their drop. They wouldn't accrue any more interest after that point either. And then maybe one other important distinction is right now is KP&F and regular capers, of course, there's partial lump sum options if you get ready to retire. Like for capers 1 members, they can take 10%, 20%, up to 50% up front. KP&F members who enter into this drop program would not be eligible for that, the regular partial lump sum under the KP&F program, because they're participating in this drop program. It was established, as a retention effort. I think particularly it started out with Highway Patrol. Originally there was going to be a five-year sunset, and I think after 4 years it was extended for another 5 years. The pilot study, KBI, was added as well. Since all this is kind of behavioral, to get to the fiscal note, as the chair indicated, since this is a behavioral thing, are people, if they're eligible for the drop program, do they still work as long as they would have? And then they stay 3 more years maybe in the drop program? Or do they actually retire earlier, and then that drop period gets them to where they had originally intended to retire? So it's a behavioral thing, and so actuaries hate trying to guess behavioral things. And so there's no fiscal note on the bill because it's all behavioral. And I think that was one of the reasons originally perhaps the legislature had established the pilot program to try to get some experience, experience in terms of how it's worked for the Highway Patrol and how it's worked for the KBI. And referring back then to my testimony on page 2, there's a box there. And so you can see it's starting out in 2015 through 2021. It started out pretty slow, and currently in 2021, there were 17 members between the patrol and the KBI that elected the drop. So that's, you can kind of see, and we've actually had then 10 members who served their drop program and then ultimately retired. So I think the interest in it has grown since then. In total, there's about 7,800 police and fire members, which of course is part of the CAPERS umbrella system. But of that, about 562 then are Highway Patrol troopers or KBI agents. So about 7% of the current KP&F members are eligible for the drop program. And it ultimately, since it's a behavioral thing, the member just has to ultimately decide, does it make sense to enter the drop, get that drop accumulated payments at the end, or does it make sense If they were going to work 5 more years, do they just stay in the KPNF program, earn 5 more years of service under KPNF and that multiplier, and so their lifetime benefit would be higher. So it's a very individual situation. They have to do that calculation, which might work best for them. So since there's a behavioral thing, there's no known actuarial costs at this time. If you look at the fiscal note, there are some administrative costs. We've got, usually we try to absorb it, but this one there's some IT costs to do some reprogramming, and then some permanent one additional position, and then a temporary position to help staff the anticipated interest in this should be opened up to all KPNF members. And not that I'd say the KPNF group is a needy group, but they always have a lot of questions about their potential retirement benefit. So we get lots of calls and lots of emails, and of course that's what we're there for, but we want to have the staff then to respond to their questions. So anyway, no actuarial note as such, a little administrative costs, and certainly we try to respond to any questions now or at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Neighbor, and thank you, Director.
Thank you, Director. One quick question. When I go back and look at the budget amount on this, the KPNF people are responsible for paying the difference. It's not the capers per se. So you have to have your employer agree, and that employer knows that that percentage will go up with the drop member. Is that correct?
They'd continue to pay the normal KPNF employer contribution rate, that 23%. And ultimately, if in fact it does have an actuarial impact, the way it works right now, the KPNF employers have to pay that full actuarial rate, so it would just ultimately flow to increased employer contributions to pay the cost. And there's about 115 KPNF employers around the state.
I know there are a lot of, people that have questions about, well, are you going to raise my rate, and is my employer rate going to go up? But this is an agreement with that group.
That's right. So the employer and the employee has to agree to it. The employee's rate would not go up. Maybe down the road at some point, the employer rate might go up marginally, but again, we wouldn't know that till we have some experience.
And one more question. Based on your notes here, so if the account does not earn interest in the system investment below 7.75, they're not going to get interest then, is that correct, if it falls below?
For that year, and every year there's a calculation. If we at least get to 7.75, then they get 3% interest on their account. If we fall below that, we hope not, but someday we may, then for that year, the drop participants would not get any interest posted to their account.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Conway, under administrative cost, is that a typo? Expanding the drop plan is expected to general. Should that be generate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So a couple questions I have, Alan. We had 60 members that did participate. How many, I think you mentioned what the total population was that could have. What was the number?
Mr. Chairman, I mentioned of the potential KPNF members that work for the Highway Patrol of the KBI, there's 562. And I don't know whether if we look in the actuarial evaluation, we know how many were retirement eligible. So about 120 would meet that requirement of being at normal retirement.
So we might have seen an uptake of about 50%, 60 out of 120? Okay. So thank you. I appreciate that information. Then I would like to look a moment at the fiscal note. And as I see the actuary tried to, Is anyone wishing to address that? The actuary tried to give us an idea, and in each case, the low, medium, and high cost, there was an increase in that cost. And I do want to note that and look at that it could be from mild to meaningful as we were looking at the actuary's analysis. And again, because I'm simple and like things that fit on the back of an envelope, you mentioned an example of Joe, and let's say we used an example of Bob just for fun. And if I would say that Bob was 50 and either elected drop and how that would play out if I elected to drop for 4 years and then retired, and what that total benefit in a single case was versus, I don't know, say Dennis, who worked until age 54 and then retired, to just compare the difference in the two, to look at what that net cost could be, and that I think we all would be excited to provide the flexibility that our participants could use for a variety of reasons, but to get kind of a handle on what that comparison of cost would be, because I would assume if I didn't live very long, and of course these guys aren't afraid of anything, so their life expectancy may be short, but if the longer I live, that I have a higher benefit by not electing drop, right? So in drop, I'm setting some money aside, but my benefit is frozen at a lower level.
Yes, that's correct.
If I do not elect it, I get a higher benefit, et cetera. So at some point, I would expect those lines to cross, and I think it might be helpful for us to assess the risk we might be exposed to if we just saw a couple of those examples, if CAPERS could just generate a sample like that. And I'd be glad to work with proponents to figure out what a realistic case might look like to get a handle on that.
Yes, we'd be pleased to do that.
So thank you. Other questions, or did I bore everyone sufficiently? All right. All right. It's seeing none. Thank you for your discussion. With that, we will look forward to our first proponent testimony and welcome Mr. Ed Klump.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Ed Klump. I'm here representing the Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Peace Officers Association. Appreciate the committee having a hearing on this. This is something that our associations have been working on for a while. This is one of our legislative priorities for this year. I want to give you a little bit of information kind of leading into this. There are about 1/3 of our law enforcement agencies in the state of Kansas who are under KP&F that would be eligible for this. 2/3 are under regular CAPERS, and regular CAPERS is not eligible for this. It also applies only to the law enforcement officers in those agencies. It does not apply to non-law enforcement employees. So it doesn't apply to records clerks. Lab people are not included in it. The KBI, for example, it is like the KBI, it's only the agents, it's only the troopers. It's not civilian staff that are eligible for this. Just clear that up a little bit. We strongly support this bill and expanding this out. I want to take you back, and Representative Riley, you brought this up as the original reason. And actually, the original reason this was brought up by the Highway Patrol when they were experiencing some severe shortages in troopers. They were unable to fill their positions, and they needed an incentive to keep troopers longer while they expanded their recruiting abilities. And then, to expand the recruiting abilities, their pay was substantially raised. And that's one of the things that led to low numbers in the beginning of the KHP participation, is because the employees found out their increase in pay would give them more benefits than the drop would. So they had the incentive to stay to get that higher salary figured into their 3-year average. And so that was one of the things that happened there. When the KBI asked to come on, they were suffering the same thing. It was not so much in their lab personnel, they were having trouble there too. But this didn't affect the lab personnel because they're not in KP&F and they wouldn't have been eligible for it. Only the agents are in KP&F. And they were doing the same thing. They had a large number of agency vacancies. agent vacancies, I'm sorry, agent vacancies. And so they were wanting to retain some of their senior agents so that they wouldn't have as many vacancies because they were unable to recruit enough people to fill them. This is the same thing we're faced with today. As you know, there is a very difficult time recruiting new police officers today. There's a difficult time in retaining police officers today. And we're faced with very much the same situation the KHP and the KBI were in the onset of this program. Our challenges in recruiting and retention right now, I think, are unprecedented. I've been in law enforcement since 1970. I've never seen anything like this where we have the difficulty today. We used to fill a room with applicants to take the test, and we might have 10 or 15 vacancies. We're lucky now if we get 25 people to take the test for 10 or 15 vacancies. And by the time people finish the testing, and some of them don't pass backgrounds, we're unable to fill the vacancies we have. One of the questions I get asked by legislators a lot, yeah, but you're keeping the old people. We want to keep the people down here on the street working. Well, the reality is, no matter where your vacancy is, it's a vacancy, and the vacancies usually show up at the low end of the organization. And that's because you have to have a span of control. People in the military, you understand that. You have to have a span of control to have adequate supervision over your personnel. And so there can be some fluctuation in that, but for the most part, when we're short 15, 20 people in a large agency, those are primarily coming off the street personnel. And it means some of these people are going down and working the street because we got to answer our calls, we got to do our investigations. So that's the situation we're in, and that's why we're here today, asking for this to be expanded to all of the KP&F participants. This has been covered, but I want to just stress this point. The participation in this program is optional. It's optional to the employee, it's optional to the employer. And even if the employer selects to participate, that employer still has the option on each individual person that wants to enter drop. They don't have to enter a contract with anybody if they don't want to. If they want to enter it with part of their people that might be in an area where they want to retain people, they can do that. If they're using this program and our recruiting changes and we can fill our positions and they don't want to use drop, they can stop using it. So it's totally within their realm of option. But now we don't even have that option. And that's what we're asking you for. Can we have this option? It was talked about there's a potential for a slight increase in employer contribution over the years. We don't know if that'll happen yet. But I want to point this out. Director Conroy said that if that takes place, every KP&F employer will be paying that rate because it changes the employer actuarial rate. I believe that was accurate. So if that's going to happen, every one of our agencies that are under KP&F are going to be paying that bill. Is it right that we're paying the bill for the KBI and the KHP, but we can't participate? You know, it seems like if we have the potential of paying the bill, then we ought to be able to participate in the program. We ought to reap the benefits of it. So I'd ask you to consider that. We believe that drop will help us in reducing our number of vacancies on our agencies. We believe that that will help us in having fewer vacancies, recruiting as many as we can, qualified individuals. And I hear that from our agencies across the state. But there's another benefit to drop as well, and I want you to keep this in mind. Our law enforcement officers and other first responders dedicate themselves to the public safety of our communities. And they do that sometimes at great costs. We know that we have loss of lives sometimes in all of our fields. But there's also a toll that takes place with our families. Working in first responder agencies, there's no holidays off. There's no, we work weekends, we work nights, we work 3 shifts. And there's a lot of times we're missing family events. And there's other professions that do the same thing, medical profession, nurses, doctors. But just keep in mind, this is an opportunity to do something positive for these employees. And it not only helps them, but it helps our agencies, as we've indicated. If we can reduce our vacancies, it helps our agencies. That helps public safety in our communities. And at the same time, we're giving them a little boost in benefit in exchange for staying those few extra years to help us through this recruiting and retention hump. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions when it's appropriate. Thank you very much.
So thank you. If I may, we'll go through the proponent testimony and then have questions committee. So thank you. Next, I have Chief Blassingame. And if I have mispronounced, please correct me. And welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman. Committee, it's Officer Blassingame. I am the Chief Steward with the Topeka Police Department.
Thank you.
Fraternal Order of Police. My testimony here was co-authored by Deputy Darren Marr with the Shawnee County Sheriff's Department, who was also the Chief Steward with the Shawnee County Sheriff's Department. So he was unable to make it here today. So I offer our testimony on behalf of the Kansas State Fraternal Order of Police. We represent over 4,200 members in law enforcement in the state of Kansas, as well as about 380,000 law enforcement officers across the United States. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you guys today in support of House Bill 2509. We are aware that there is a severe shortage of qualified job applicants across the country. Law enforcement is not immune to that. As Chief Clump just mentioned, we're in an unprecedented recruiting, hiring, and retention crisis in the state of Kansas. And I don't use that word crisis lightly. Kind of on top of what the chief had just said there. We used to get hundreds of people who would apply for a handful of positions. Right now, as of today, the Topeka Police Department, we're 28 officers short. So that's almost a shift full of officers that we're short, and it's simply because we can't fill these positions. Of those 28 positions, if our local government gave us the authority to fill 100 positions right now, we can't do it because we can't get the qualified applicants. Last week, we held testing for the Topeka Police Department, and we were only able to get 23 applicants who actually showed up and tested. So of that 23, only 15 made the cut between the physical and the written test. And I'm sure out of that 15, we'll probably be lucky if we get 7 to 8 people who actually make it through the background process. So this recruiting and retention and hiring crisis that I call it is a real thing, and it certainly faces us today. And we need to do everything that we can to help with that issue. So on the retirement side of things with this retention issue, right now, or within the next 5 years, about 30% of the Topeka police officers are going to be eligible for retirement. Within the next 12 months, the Shawnee County Sheriff, about 30% of their members will be eligible for retirement in the next 12 months. So we have a lot of members, a lot of officers who are going to be retiring or eligible for retirement soon. So we're talking about hundreds of hours or hundreds of years of experience with these officers who are eligible for retirement. So the Deferred Retirement Option Program, right now it's only available to KHP and the KBI. We're hoping that this will be expanded to include all members within law enforcement that's in the KP&F pension program. I understand that this is not going to be a silver bullet. It's not the magic fix that's going to help this retirement, retention, recruiting, and all that problem that we have right now. But right now, if it can just help us with some people, if we can help retain some members, then that's certainly going to be beneficial. The co-author of this testimony, Darren Marr, he's 52 years old. He has his 23 years of service in, so he has his total of 75 points. He is retirement eligible. He's a living example of somebody who is not in an administrative position, but somebody who actually works the street. He is a deputy patrolling the streets of Shawnee County, and if this is implemented, he's likely to stay on additional years of service to take advantage of this program. The city of Wichita, they have their own retirement program down there. They're not part of KP&F, but they do have a drop program down there. It has been successful in Wichita in retaining officers as well. So we believe that this is something that will be beneficial to help retain officers and that experience for not only the officer, the deputy, the departments, but also the citizens of the state of Kansas, if we can expand this to include other agencies. So we strongly support this bill.
Thank you for your service, and thank you for your time to present testimony.
Thank you.
Our next proponent, Mr. Bob Wing, Robert Wing. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you. Committee members, thank you to have allowing me this opportunity to address you on this issue. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my prepared testimony you all have, and it mirrors quite a bit of what Ed said and the chief steward, so I'm not going to bore you by going through that. I did prepare a little bit of a side issue that hits on what the officer said about the city of Wichita. But most of you know me. My name is Bob Wing. I'm a retired fire captain from Kansas City. I was lucky enough to serve 42 years in the fire department of Kansas City. I retired as president of the State Fire Council, and I serve today as president emeritus of the council and of the IEFF local union in Kansas City. I was one of the lucky ones to get to stay there 42 years. You will see very few police officers and firefighters be able to come before you and give you this type of testimony, and it was pure luck. But it was truly a pleasure to serve, and it still is. And I think it's important that we visit the issue of the drop as it relates to both the police officers who have testified and the firefighters in the state of Kansas also. I chose to go to Wichita because the documents that Mr. Conroy provided the firefighters on the cost, you've heard, we can't project the cost because no one is in the program right now to give us some type of paint a picture, if you will, of what the cost would be, or even project the cost. So I went to Wichita. I talked to Captain Matt Schulte of the fire department in Wichita. He gave me a little bit of history. The drop program in Wichita was initiated in 2003. It is still in place today, and virtually every police officer and firefighter participates in the drop. The plan down there is between 80 and 90% sound. And I know that's been an issue with capers and KPNF here, but I think, Mr. Chairman, if it hasn't changed that much, both the KPNF and the judges programs are progressing to get to the point percentage-wise where the funding level would be acceptable to the legislature and ultimately to the citizens of the state of Kansas. The payment, as far as Wichita goes, paying in is the employees pay 7% in, and they are guaranteed 5% coming out. No matter what, I didn't get into the employee side of the participation and what they pay in, but I would imagine it would be somewhat on par to what employers pay into the KPNF now in the state. To me, as Ed said, it's a question of equity now. I think for the most part it has worked in the state of Kansas to hold the troopers in somewhat and the KBI agents also. But it is interesting how the three of us, without even comparing notes, still have the same story to tell as far as attraction and retention. That's a very real issue now in the fire service, such as it is in the police department. If you've heard that testimony. When I came in the fire service, I was like the testimony of the police officers. I took a test with 700 people for 50 jobs. Those 50 jobs were filled in 4 months. And we did that for a long period of time, attracted that type of individual applicant and filled those jobs on a timely fashion. Today, the Kansas City, Kansas Fire Department has a class of 14 firefighters in their academy, and they're still 40 short. We're not going to fill that this year. And that is clearly an issue of attraction and retention, okay? And noting my years of service, I don't think anyone could stand before you either in a police uniform or a fire department uniform and say it would be beneficial for the community or the state of Kansas, period, to have individuals stay in those respective jobs as long as I was lucky enough to. Okay, it just doesn't happen. There's too much out there today in people's lives that they want to get out of the service earlier. Plus, what we're dealing with on the fire side is so much more than I dealt with 45 years ago now. as opposed to what they're dealing with today in their work habits. So we're 40 down in Kansas City, so that's clearly an issue. And in this scenario, and Mr. Chairman, I very rarely correct you, but I will. Not all firefighters are afraid of nothing. I've been married 46 years. I guarantee you, I've had some fear put in me, and still do today. But I'll paint a real picture for you in my individual scenario. I think this will make sense to you. I capped out at 38 years. Okay, I paid all I could pay in. I reached my 90%. I draw a heck of a payment in benefit today from that pension system. And I think everyone in our ranks should enjoy that, and I do. And we all worked hard for that, and our employers were good to us and paid into the system such that they did. But with me capping out at 38 years and staying that extra 4 years, in my case, it was just because of age. That's the way my cards played, and as a testimony has been, every individual has an individual story to tell, and everyone will do something different. Not everyone would go for the drop if it was there. But for those 4 years that I was still there, between the time I capped and the time I retired, I paid my 7.25 in. The employer continued to pay in, but the law does not allow a corresponding benefit beyond the time you cap out. So that 4 years that I paid in, there was not a corresponding benefit. That's just the way the law is written. That's nobody's fault. And the employer paid in also. This obviously would give a solution to that issue. If this drop was in place when I was there at my 38-year cap, I'd have entered the drop, paid 3 years in, drawn the drop, and got out. So that is not a complaint. That is just a fact. Like I said, I enjoy a heck of a good benefit today. And a lot of it is because of the activities and the efforts of the firefighters and police officers and the legislators over the years who have afforded us this benefit. So with that, I'll close, Mr. Chairman, and I would entertain any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to committee. Thank you for helping us in the past, and it sounds like I'll look forward to meeting your wife someday. Anyway.
Mr. Chairman, be careful what you ask.
Thank you. Our next proponent, Chief Atterbury. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, committee members. First off, our association, the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, are proponents of this bill right up front. Well, I'm Darrell Atterbury. I'm Chief of Police for the City of Bel Air. I'm the legislative chair for the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, and I'm a governor at large for the Peace Officers Association. I was employed from 1981 to 2014 with the Wichita Police Department. And I am a beneficiary of the drop program Chief Wing was talking about. The program started, the first discussions of that were in 2001. That's when I hit a time to make a decision in my career. Do I stay? Because to leave at 20 years, I could get 50%. Leave at 30 years, I get 75%. And then this drop thing was coming around, and it got explained to me that it was going to be a really good deal to stick around and be a benefit to our community and be able to get something from that to add to my retirement. Because, you know, of course, at that point, I'm looking to the future. I was looking to the future all along, but I wanted something to help my family out later on. And this one, this drop program helped with that. So I worked for a total of 33 and a half years. I was able to buy that down in the city of Wichita under their plan with my accrued sick leave. So I left at 33 and a half years, and now I'm at the city of Bel Air, been there for 7.5 years. We're capers, we're not KPNF, but maybe someday. Because of the availability of the drop, I was able to stay at Wichita and do the thing that I love for longer. Now I'm doing it in Bel Air, and I don't know how long I'll stay. It might be 42 years, I'm not sure. But I see your decision on this is kind of a policy decision. Do you want to keep long-term employees that are trained, the brain trust of the organizations they're in, police or fire, to help younger officers and firefighters up to come on and move up? Or do you want people to leave sooner? That's a question to ask. We encourage, or we in law enforcement, and I think fire, we would like to see this as an option to encourage our staff to stay longer so they can serve their communities for a longer period of time. It makes a difference when people know what's going on. You lose so much institutional knowledge when somebody, and I'll say like me, like Mr. Wing back here, leave a department. And it's, I think, good to have us around longer to bring up younger employees. We believe it's also useful in recruitment. Now, Mr. Klump talked about people looking forward to a drop. Well, this recruitment thing we've got going on, we get people coming in from Florida, Texas, Ohio, all of which I believe have drop. And that's a question they ask us when they come and they ask about our departments. They ask about the retirement system and the drop program because they had it in their own state. And, you know, it's one of those things right now we have to say, no, we don't have it. We also believe it's really good for, like for me, I was, well, now it's mid-career. I was mid-career and having to make a decision as to whether to go or stay. And this program, the drop program, helped me to stay. And during that time, I have, you know, grown as an individual. I've been able to help a lot of officers. I've been involved in a lot of programs that have been beneficial to my community and the state. And that is in large part just to being able to get the drop program from the city of Wichita where I was before. But I'll stand for questions later.
Thank you. Thank you for joining committee. Committee, we have at least one additional piece of written testimony from Tim Smith, President of the Kansas State Association of Fire Chiefs, that is in our folder for our review. And is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent of House Bill 2509? At this time, I'd see, committee, if there are questions. I would also ask us to be mindful of the hour and what we need to do going forward. So please ask the questions we have from the wealth of information available to us, but we will try and stay on track as we are able. Questions, committee? I'm sure that our conferees are happy to follow up with us after if there are other questions. Seeing none, thank you. If there are no further proponents, is there anyone wishing to appear as an opponent of House Bill 2509? Anyone neutral? And anyone at all? Do we have anything online? Okay, seeing nothing on those. Most importantly, I want to say thank you for the service to everyone who is here to help to educate us today. We appreciate that. I appreciate you being here. And with that, we will close the hearing on 2509. Committee, our next item of business is House Bill 2561. We will move to that order of business, and we would ask for an overview from the reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2561 would transfer $1 billion during fiscal year 2022, the current fiscal year. There'd be a transfer straight from the State General Fund to the Kansas Public Employees Retirement Fund, or the KPERS Trust Fund. Of that $1 billion transfer, the first $253,866,022 would be for the purpose of making full payment of reduced employer contributions from the KPERS school group that occurred in fiscal years 2017 and 2019. I remember there was a delay of about $64 million in fiscal year 17, about $194 million in 2019 that were then layered payments that were put in over the course of 20 years, level dollar payments, approximately about a little over $25 million per year for over the 20-year period. And this bill also then amends the statute, KSA 74-4920, the CAPERS employer contribution statute, to strike the language that required that level dollar employer contribution payment. So those 20-year payments would be stricken from the statute, removed, as they're no longer be necessary due to the full payment of the $253.9 million. In order to make the transfer during the current fiscal year, the bill would become effective upon publication in the Kansas Register. And I'd be happy to stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions for the reviser? Seeing Representative Riley.
Can you clarify for me what the thought was of why eliminating the employer's contribution? Because we're still going to be, we're not at 100% on our funds here just by putting in $1 billion. We're still having, we'll still be in debt. And so why are we changing that?
This is just that elimination of those 20-year level dollar payments to make up for the delayed or reduced contributions in 19. It's not the full keeper's employer contribution. It's just that piece that was kind of delayed and set aside due to some budgetary issues back in those fiscal years. And then now we're kind of advance payment on that, so you don't have to make that full 20-year payment schedule.
Thank you. And Director Conroy, I may mention in your testimony, I think you show us those amounts, which may give us some clarity on why and which payments would no longer be made. Other questions for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you for the overview. We will go past the fiscal note because better than that, we have neutral testimony from the Director of Budget, Adam Proffitt. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Adam Proffitt, Director of the Budget. Thank you, committee, for allowing me to be in front of you today. I am here. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, good. I am here today testifying as neutral on this bill, as was stated by the chair. Pardon me. This bill has effectively two parts, as was mentioned by the reviser. It's a $1 billion transfer into CAPERS from the SGF, but the first $253 million would go to pay off that layering payment from the skip payments from fiscal 17 and 19. So I want to focus in on that portion right now if I can, and we'll get to the balance in a moment. So the administration is firmly in support of the concept of paying off the layering payment. As a matter of fact, the governor had a nearly identical provision in the governor's budget report, or recommendation rather, where she was making an appropriation to the Department of Education to pay this off. One little nuanced difference between the governor's recommendation and this bill is that, again, the governor's recommendation was making an appropriation to the Department of Education, who would then turn around and make the payment to CAPERS. The net effect to CAPERS is the same. The layering payment goes away, the $253 million goes there. We see the immediate benefit of not paying $25.8 million, and we see $172 million worth of savings. This bill does a revenue transfer of SGF directly to CAPERS. That's important for a technical reason, but one that's kind of important to me as a matter of accounting. So the skip payments came from the school portion of CAPERS. So by doing a revenue transfer instead of an appropriation, we are not recognizing now an expenditure against a missed expenditure from a previous budget cycle. So if we had our druthers, we would rather it be an appropriation Department of Education so we can correct that and account for all the expenditures that should have been made from the school district to CAPERS. By doing a direct appropriation, that would happen. The revenue transfer does not. Again, from CAPERS, same thing. For us, it matters from a matter of accounting. Just want to make sure that's clear. The next component of the bill, where we remain neutral on as well, is the balance beyond the $253 million, which would be about $774 million, $776, would be just an extraordinary payment to pay down a portion of the UAL, the Legacy Unfunded Actuarial Liability. A couple of things that I would like to point out on this. Again, this is a revenue transfer, so it's 100% SGF being transferred to CAPERS. Any savings that we see from this by reduced contributions are going to be about 86% SGF. So with the layering payment that we're paying off, that was 100% SGF. With any extraordinary deposits, only about 86% of that is SGF, because whenever we make contributions to CAPERS on the regular, it's a mix of SGF and fee funds or federal funds or other funds that go to the agencies. Therefore, any extraordinary deposit will show a savings, but 86% would be SGF, about 14% would be other funds. Still a savings to the state, but just a key area of differentiation. On top of that, the way that this bill is constructed right now, and it certainly could be amended, we would not recognize any savings or reduce contributions until fiscal 25. A mechanism would need to be inserted either into this bill or into the final budget bill to allow us to hardwire whatever the new rates are beginning in fiscal 23 by making the deposit today. Absent that, the next time the rates will be re-upped and looked at again would be fiscal 25. So yes, there would be savings, but it would be in an out year, not an immediate benefit. And then the other thing I would just want to point out as a neutral conferee is that it's no secret we continue to beat estimates, revenue estimates, which is great news. We are currently $214 million above the year-to-date revenue estimates. So it's $214 million more to the ending balance right now. With that come a lot of really good ideas on what to do with the money. Should we add it to the ending balance? Should we put more into the stabilization fund? There's been some talk about some water obligations down the road. What should we do with that? I think it might be prudent to compile a list of all these ideas, wait a little bit to make sure revenues continue to beat estimates, and then kind of review all these new ideas at once to determine what the best course would be. Certainly open to having the discussion as it relates to a KPERS deposit, but would fall short of fully committing to that today as it stands right now. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to committee. Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you explain to me why we don't realize the savings until for 5 years, and what would be a mechanism to realize that sooner?
Sure, and Director Conroy can certainly speak to the specifics of how the valuation is done and the timing of the valuation versus the contribution rates. But it comes down to there's a lag between when the actuarial valuation is done and when the next time that the contribution rates are updated. And as it stands right now, the next valuation, I think this would go into the 2021 valuation, 2022 valuation, 2021 valuation, which would then be reflected in a couple years from now for the contribution rates. So it's a matter of timing.
Is there a statutory way that we could accelerate that on a one-time basis so we realize this sooner?
There absolutely is. Something similar happened last year with the arbitrage bond, the $500 million obligation bond that this committee worked through. I believe as the bill left committee, it did not have the mechanism. So we worked through it on the appropriations side to have that put into the mega bill. And what they did is just hardwired. So Director Conroy's team did the analysis for us to say this is what the contribution rates would be should you choose to do that. So the mega bill, or the omnibus bill rather, hardwired the new contribution rates.
Thank you. Further questions? Representative Topiker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just since you mentioned how much we are over last year's budgeted amount or the predicted projected revenues for last month, what would be approximately the total amount of revenue that we are over from this time last year?
Mr. Chair, very good question. I don't have that in front of me right now. I'd be happy to get that. I can get it within minutes of being done. I can sit down and have somebody send that to me. It's
ballpark.
I'd hate to even hazard a guess, and I would have to caveat it as well because
it's moving. It's different every month, and it's going to continue to be that way. But
it's significant. On the sales, for example, are up roughly 8 to 10%. Sales taxes are up 10%-ish. Compensating use is up in the neighborhood of 20-25%. Corporate is up 15%-ish, and individual is up 6 to 8%. There's some timing issues because there was a delay of the filing deadline last year, so it gets a little complicated.
Right, and I keep hearing the percentages all the time, and then there'll be a number thrown out how much we are over projected revenue for, say, January. But I don't hear a total amount from last year, so
yes,
over last year.
As soon as I sit down, I can send an email to you, or.
Okay. I want to know how much we can spend.
And Mr. Scott, if you know what it actually says, if you wish to just step up and answer that portion.
I have my glasses on. So compared to last year at this time, we're 4.4%. Last year, we had collected 4.9 million, and we're up 4.9 billion, and we're up a little bit over $5.1 billion. So, but just so people recall, last year, there was some shifting that was done. So we're up substantially more if that shift would not have occurred than with the shift that wasn't, and that had to do with the timing of some of the receipts.
And the timing would make it harder to fully unpack. So we may even want to follow up with that, Representative Toplicker, to get some definition further. Further questions for the Budget Director? Representative Neighbor.
How much of that is one-time money?
Another fine question, and we don't have a spreadsheet that says that. We recognize that there is a level of one-time money that is in here. To what degree, we're not real sure. There's one-time funding that's clearly impacting this. Part of that's, corporate profit rates are extraordinarily high this past year and a half, really, and they continue to be extraordinarily high. So at some point, we would expect that to normalize. There's a lot of federal dollars in the system, but we also think that a lot of it's, the labor market participation rate is high. Unemployment is very low. There's a lot of good news in the economy. So a lot of it is ongoing, but there is a level of one-time funding for sure.
And that has to be spent by, is it 2023 or 2025? I think there's a limitation on some of those funds.
So what I was referencing was simply the SGF revenues. Yes, with the federal dollars that are in the state's possession right now, the ARPA funds, if you will, pardon me, 2024, I believe, is the end of the fiscal recovery funds.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Prophet. Could you go into further detail about the difference between the direct transfer from SGF to CAPERS versus going through the Department of Education, or Department of Education?
So,
what would be the end result if we just did the direct transfer? I mean, is it
I
more?
can step on that for just a moment, Representative. I think the Budget Director brings up a good point. The end result is the same, and I think the accounting is necessary to correct as it goes through the Department of Education as the payments would have. Nonetheless, I don't mean to take away any response you'd have.
Oh, please, Mr. Chair, that would be my response.
Okay, I didn't know if there was a legal ramification or if it was more of an accounting paper situation.
So the CAPERS funds do count towards the school finance formula, so I'd like to be able to recognize the entirety of the money flowing through Department of Education for that purpose. We are not in trouble as it relates to maintenance of effort for K-12 right now. Should there be another measurement that comes out at some point in time, I'd like to be able to claim credit for all of it, though, down the road. So today, no legal ramifications, but certainly some that are impactful.
Thank you for the questions. Other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for the testimony and for bringing those items to our attention.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So thank you. With that, we'll move to our proponent testimony. We do have two proponents, and I'd ask both of them to be as quick as possible, since I'm one of them anyway. But our first one is Director Conroy, and if we can hit our highlights and ask the questions that we have, that would be ideal. Thank you. Welcome, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's right. And I am before you today as a proponent of this bill that would provide $1 billion with a B for the CAPERS Trust Fund. And to help support that, we have one of our trustees, Treasurer Lynn Rogers, back there. Also, of course, on the boards in support of this $1 billion payment. And it's been touched on. There's two parts. There's paying off those layering payments from some missed employer contributions before, as David and the Budget Director have explained. And so the policymakers want to make good on those payments, and so the decision was made to kind of put it on the credit card, 20-year payment plan, $25 million a year from the general fund. And so this would pay off that obligation, saves the state, of course, $25 million on an annual basis. And just in terms of budgetary savings, in total, though, by prepaying, it's $172 million of money that's saved on that. So that's paying off those layering payments for those missed employer contributions. The second part it then is about $746 million then that just goes to the trust fund to pay down the unfunded actuarial liability for the school/state school group. And as you remember, that unfunded liability, it's an obligation of the state. You all own it lock, stock, and barrel. We're charging you 7.75% interest. And, you know, it's not if it'll be paid, it's when it'll be paid. And so this would accelerate those payments. On the plus side then, so if we get the transfer, so the 746 will immediately decrease that unfunded actuarial liability. And in fact, on the last page of my testimony is a little box that kind of summarizes really the key points. So it decreases that unfunded liability for the state school group by $746 million. So it goes from right at $5 billion down to $4.225 billion. That funded ratio, assets to liabilities, you know, you want to be on your way to 100%. You want to be, our next hurdle we want to get over is 80% funded. This would, the projection would, it would increase that funded ratio by 3.4%, get you over that 80% hurdle, which is certainly a marker. It's been certainly a while since we've been there. And then in terms of the money saved from the employer standpoint, so you don't have to pay the $25 million. If you give us the 746, that employer contribution rate goes from 13.1 down to right at 12% is the projection. So between the two, there'd be annual savings in the budget of $82 million that now you wouldn't have to put in to the KPERS trust fund for state school employer contributions. So the first 5-year savings there would be $429 million. And of course, lots of assumptions to do that, but first $250 million pays off those layering payments for missed prior year contributions. The other 3/4 of it then would go to the unfunded liability and improve the funded ratio and reduce the unfunded liability.
Thanks, sir. Committee, are there any questions? Representative Proctor.
Yeah, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and I'm the slowest guy in the room, so bear with me. The previous conferee said that we wouldn't realize savings for 5 years, but what you're showing here is that we immediately realize savings in terms of contributions. Where's the...
Right, and this does assume that has done previously, like with the pension funding bonds, that those rates, like that 12% rate that I mentioned, that somewhere in the language, some point in the legislative process, that rate would be hardwired.
So currently, that's not...
That's right. Under the normal, because of some statutory thing about the delay, it really wouldn't show up until 2025, fiscal year 2025, if that hardwiring does not take place.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Are there any other questions? Representative Riley, did that answer your question as well? You good? Okay. No more questions? Thank you, sir. Our next proponent is Chairman Stephen Johnson, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, committee. Thank you, Vice Chair Croft, ranking neighbor. And I'm excited about the bill. You've gotten great answers from the Director of KPERS and the Director of Budget. I don't need to repeat any of that. I think they've given us good direction on how we can handle the payments, which is critical as well. I can't underscore enough. I want to talk out of both sides of my mouth for a moment. Had you told me 10 years ago when we were at 56% funded and further failing that we would be at this point today, I would not have believed that that was possible for a variety of reasons. So it is extremely exciting to me that we might be looking at a move that gets us to that level. But I want to provide a couple cautions to that also. One reason that we're doing well is we've had really good market performance, and markets do tend to revert to the mean. And that may not be the same tailwind that we have experienced. Nonetheless, it's been a big help to get us here. And as we go below our investment return assumption, that can bring us back from that number. The other thing is to always be vigilant for where we give away benefits, which we are not actively paying for, but we give away benefits that increase the unfunded liability. So we want to be careful of that piece as well. The other one, as we continue to monitor the health of a system, I am excited about this because it reduces our payments going forward. That's a long-term reduction of what we have, and it takes the debt off the balance sheet. The bonding that we did has been a huge help. It's a big part of what has helped. However, that didn't eliminate debt. I just moved it to a different place, and I'm still carrying that debt. Here I am eliminating that debt. But my caution is while we're 80% funded, we shifted $2 billion over time. There's less than that principal left, but I'd have the director track that for us. And if, for say, it's $1.5 billion in principal left over on state general fund obligations, I still think of that as part of our CAPERS debt. And I would actually net that out of the 80% because that debt isn't gone. It's just somewhere else. And I want to be mindful of that. Nonetheless, this is the measure that the plan looks to. It's what is accounted. It's how we are ranked in a number of things. So I want to first celebrate the possibility of that achievement as we move together. I thank the director for reminding us how we can best handle that $253 million. Exciting that we have agreement from the Joint Committee over the summer that made that specific recommendation. The governor's office and the legislature look forward to making that step together and figuring out the other things. Thank you for the chance to testify.
Committee, this is your chance. Any questions? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Chairman, you, in your testimony, indicate that we would save $100 million per year. Is part of that $100 million the figures that we received from CAPERS, FY23, $75 billion, FY20, $24, $77, and so on?
Yes, so all of that. There are the two pieces that CAPERS presents, and one, to Representative Proctor's question, would be if we hardwired that change to save those dollars in payments against the UAL on the $700+ million. The other are the two payments that we would make to that layered portion that we would no longer need to make. Is that some $25 million between the two? And it's when you add those two numbers together, you get into that ballpark of the change of the future cash flow required.
And when you say the savings will be over $100 million per year, is that in the first year, or is that over a certain number of years?
That is per year, and it would be essentially over the next, well, the time frame to our amortization period that we would be saving that annually. And it's a slightly growing number as you look at it. It's a little more than that. I gave a very rough round number, and CAPERS has the precise numbers. I did not replicate them.
Well, you seem to know what you're doing. Thank you.
Are there other questions? Representative Dodson.
When we were talking about the 4.9 billion down to 4.25, and then you commented about the 2 billion that's in bond and maybe at this point 1.5. Is that inclusive of that inside the 4.9 currently, or is that, so we're looking at 5.7 or something perhaps, yeah?
Correct. Just again, this is a confusing piece, and I'm bringing up a related but separate topic. The unfunded liability is clearly that number as it sits at CAPERS and the dollars they have. We took on some debt on the state's ledger in general obligation debt just for the chance to make the interest rate difference, and that's where we see the billion that we've added from those bond transactions. But all we've done is add some interest savings. The debt we're just slowly paying down, and it's something to be mindful of as we think of the total obligation that the state still carries for CAPERS. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir. I want to call the committee's attention to Attorney General Schmidt has written testimony in your folders as well for proponents. Are there any other proponents who would like to speak? Any opponents? Anyone else? Seeing none, this closes the hearing on House Bill 2561.
Thank you, Vice Chair Croft. That takes us to our last item of business, House Bill 2586, and we would begin with an overview from the reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2586, with the, I'll try to kind of go over this fairly quickly. You'll hear from some folks that are probably a little more versed in this, so I'll just go over and say this would enact the Kansas Work and Save Program Act. And this would be, this act would be under the administration of the state treasurer, and the program would begin on or before July 1st, 2023. That the peanut of the act is to allow individuals to contribute to individual retirement accounts, IRAs, that would be offered by employers, and they could also then be through the use of payroll deductions for those employees to directly have payroll deductions and to go into these IRAs. Section 1 is the citation and definitions for the act. Section 2 is a rather lengthy list of duties. Establishes the treasurer as the trustee of the trust for the program that would hold all the assets, and provides the powers, authorities, and duties of the treasurer regarding the program. That begins at the bottom of page 2, and there's several pages there that lays out the treasurer's responsibilities, duties. Section 3 provides the requirements and structure of the program. The program would allow eligible individuals to voluntarily choose to contribute to an IRA under the program, and allow eligible employers to offer payroll deductions for employees to make those contributions. The contributions would be made to a Roth IRA unless the employee elects to contribute to a traditional IRA. The treasurer would design standard investment packages, and employees would be allowed to elect contribution rates to the IRAs that could be as low as 1% of salary or wages. In the treasurer's discretion, contribution rates may annually be increased by a rate not more than 1% per year until a participant reaches a maximum of 8%. With all contributions would of course be subject to contribution rates under the Federal Internal Revenue Code, so you don't run afoul of any IRS restrictions there. Section 3 also provides some penalties if a participating employer fails to enroll an eligible employee who requested to be under the act, and if the employer failed to do so, there'd be a $250 penalty for each eligible employee for each calendar year or portion thereof in which the employee was not enrolled in the program when they had requested to be in the program. The employee or state official may bring a civil action requiring the participating employer to enroll that employee, and shall recover any costs and reasonable attorney fees as may be allowed by the court. If the employee is still is unenrolled, the penalty would be increased to $500. No penalty would be imposed when it's established that the employer did not know the failure existed and exercised reasonable diligence to meet the requirements of the section. Section 4 requires the treasurer to adopt rules and regulations on or before July 1st, 2023 to implement the program, and enumerates some specific requirements for such rules and regulations. Section 5 provides that employers in the program should not be liable for employees' decisions to participate or not to participate, not liable for any investment decisions or investment performance, or any loss or any adverse tax consequences. And no employer would be considered a fiduciary in relation to the program. Section 6 provides that the state, the treasurer, or any officer or employee thereof shall have no responsibility or liability for compliance with IRS provisions for payment of any benefits, or shall not guarantee any interest rate or any investment return regarding the program. And this section also provides that debts, contracts, and obligations of the program are not to be considered debts, contracts, or obligations of the state, and neither the faith and credit nor the taxing power of the state would be pledged for any debts, contracts, or obligations of the program. Section 7 makes individual account information confidential, and such information would not be subject to the Open Records Act. Section 8 allows the treasurer to enter into intergovernmental agreements or memos of understanding with state agencies to receive outreach, technical assistance, enforcement, compliance services regarding the program, subject, of course, to the obligations of confidentiality. Section 9 establishes the Kansas Work and Save Administrative Fund within the state treasury, and the treasurer would be the administrator of that fund. Monies in the fund shall only be used to pay administrative costs and expenses of the program. Section 10 would provide that certain accounting, auditing, and reporting requirements by the treasurer regarding the program. Each year, a full audit of the books and accounts of the program would be required to be conducted by a CPA. And on or before August 1st of each year, the treasurer shall submit to the governor and to the legislature an audited financial report prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Section 11 requires the treasurer to implement the program so that individuals can begin contributing no later than July 1st, 2023. If the treasurer determines, however, that a portion of the program would be preempted by ERISA, the treasurer will not implement that portion of the program. And then Section 12 also then inserts a severability clause within the Act to say that if any provision within the Act is held invalid, the invalidity would not affect the other portions of the Act that can be implemented, and that invalid portion could be severed from the Act, and then the remaining portions could be implemented by the treasurer. I know it's a fast summary there, Mr. Chairman, but I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the overview. Committee questions? Seeing none. Oh, Representative Riley.
Trying to find it again. There was, I think it was section 10, but I might be wrong on that. We're talking about working with other, thank you. The section where it talked about working with other programs within the state, was that 10?
Do you mean about the agreements or the memo that understanding? Because there was that piece in Section 8, and then there's also just some piece on the Section 10 was the auditing.
Right. So in that Section 8, intergovernmental agreements, so isn't that standard language anyhow? Is that necessary to be put in here?
I think that's something that perhaps the treasurer could answer a little better. I don't know if it's absolutely essential. I think it just helps to have it in, right from the treasurer's perspective, have that clear in statute that they can enter into those agreements and share that information as without violating any potential conflicts or confidentiality.
Probably that would be like our IT department that's what we're talking about right here, are we not?
I think that could be an example, yes. But.
Further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for the overview. I believe we'll dispatch with the fiscal note if the committee is okay with that. It's pretty minimal on what is in there. And since we're lucky enough to have the treasurer as our first proponent, I would welcome him to committee. And as he comes forward, I'd thank all of the proponents for their flexibility in moving the bill to today from last Wednesday. Thank you and welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm privileged to stand here in support of this bill. We think it would really be beneficial to many, many Kansans. And I'm not going to read my testimony, but just talk a little bit about this. When I first started working in the banking world, 85% of most Americans were covered by a pension fund. Today, less than 25% are. And so there are about 55% of Kansans that have $0 saved for retirement. We think this is a program that would allow savings to be built up and accumulated over time. As you all know, today you approved 2490 for ABLE, which is savings accounts for folks that live with a handicap. This would be a similar type of program, similar as to also our Learning Quest 529s that are now 25 years in existence. Those 529 accounts now, we have almost 270,000 of those that are under our direction for almost $10 billion. Those are funds that parents and grandparents have put aside to help people save for their kids' education. This would be a similar type of thing as well. If they're covered by some kind of a retirement program, they wouldn't have to be participating in this. We would encourage them to do that. Right now, we've been doing research with a number of other states that offer this. New Mexico and Colorado have just added this, and they're starting that process. Oregon, Illinois, and California offer it as well. Oregon particularly has been very, very successful with their program. They have almost 100 million savers now that were not saving before. And again, the way to look at this is that in most cases, these are people that have no savings at all. They're not people that most banks, credit unions, or financial organizations would really want to serve because they don't have assets. Many, you've got to open an account with $1,000. Here, you'd be able to open it for, a $10 contribution, and it would also be portable. If they left one job, they could take it or keep it there and use it for the next company. So again, we think it would be very, very beneficial. My only recommendation, if you do plan to work the bill, would be to change the date of implementation from July of 23 to at least July of 24. Most of the states that we're talking to do talk about a 2 to 3 year period to implement it. Again, if we were going to do this, we'd want to make sure we do it right. We don't see a lot of startup costs. There would be, we have somebody that manages our 529, somebody that manages our ABLE. We would see somebody in this regard. There would be some marketing expenses, but we would see that as something that we would ultimately negotiate. We may, in answer to your question, the intergovernment would really gives us, as I understand the bill, gives us the authority to interact. We could do a joint program with Colorado or New Mexico or another state, similar to what we do with the ABLE, where we have a 17, 18 state consortium of states that work together. The more assets that we can put under management, the better pricing we can have for the individual participant. So that's why we may want to consider that. We may also want to look directly and do a bid with any other company that might want to take this on. So I would stand for questions if there are any from the committee.
Thank you for joining us. In committee, do you have questions for Treasurer Rogers? Seeing none at the moment, thank you for joining committee. You are welcome to stay and take questions at the end again, but thank you for being with committee. So our next proponent conferee is Glenda Du Bois, I believe, with AARP via WebEx. Glenda, welcome to committee.
Thank you, sir. And good afternoon, Chairman Johnson and members of the House Insurance and Pensions Committee. I am Glenda Du Bois, and I am the AARP Kansas State Director. Thank you so much on behalf of AARP Kansas and our more than 284,000 members for considering our testimony in support of House Bill 2586, which establishes the Kansas Work and Save Administrative Fund in the State Treasurer's Office, as we've heard. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we're dedicated to helping people ages 50 and older to improve their quality of life as they age. So in doing so, we not only focus on those persons who are nearing or currently in retirement, but we also focus on people who are at all stages of their careers and who we expect will retire in the future. A self-sufficient retirement is no longer within reach for far too many of our Kansans, but it doesn't have to be that way, is how we at AARP believe. We support this common sense solution, which we're finding in House Bill 2586, which we refer to as the Kansas Secure Future Act. We worked with Republicans and Democratic treasurers, legislators, and other stakeholders on this bill. Work and Save is bipartisan. It is similar to the Kansas Learning Quest 529 Education Savings Plan, and we know it will help over 423 Kansans to save for retirement. So this program that will be available to all Kansans and to all employers, as we've heard, if they choose, and we know it's not mandatory. So, but with your permission now, I would like to yield the rest of my time, or yield my time, to my colleague, Jessica Ekman, who will explain more about the program for us. Thank you very much. And we will all stand ready for questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and we will move straight to Ms. Ekman.
Thank you so much. I hope that everyone can see my screen.
We can.
Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jessica Ekman. I'm a senior legislative representative with AARP. Thank you for considering our testimony on House Bill 2586. This state, like many others, is facing a retirement crisis. The average Social Security benefit in Kansas is about $21,000 a year, while on average, older families in Kansas spend $24,000 a year on food, utilities, and healthcare alone. Social Security was never intended to be a person's sole source of income in retirement. At this rate, 1 out of every 2 middle-class retirees will be unable to afford their basic needs in retirement, things like medicine, utilities, and rent. This will cost taxpayers down the line in social services. If we take action today, we can reverse this trend, and that is what House Bill 2586 seeks to do. Kansas, like I said, is no exception to this retirement crisis. The Georgetown Center for Retirement Initiatives recently conducted a study that found that 22% of Kansas seniors rely on Social Security for at least 90% of their income. Personal retirement savings is a prerequisite to self-reliance in retirement, and we know that employees are 15 times more likely to save merely by having access to a way to save at work. Yet about 42% of Kansas private sector employees, approximately 423,000 people, work for an employer that does not offer a retirement plan. This problem is not going to solve itself. The problem is lack of access. You might think, can't people already save if they want to? And the answer is yes, but although individuals without access to a way to save for retirement at work could open up their own IRAs, this rarely happens. Only 5% of people will go out on their own and open an IRA, and these numbers haven't changed in decades. This legislation provides for a program that's a public-private partnership approach to retirement savings. In order to understand how the program would work, it's helpful to break it down into three groups: employers, employees, and the state. So businesses would have access to a simple plug-and-play retirement program for their employees, which is professionally managed and easy to use. The operational and regulatory burden of running a retirement plan is taken away from small business owners, and they'd be able to voluntarily choose to offer access for their employees. The private sector would facilitate the program, and it would be overseen by the state. Business owners would only be responsible for disseminating information packets to their employees and running payroll deduction. Employees are offered the option to participate in the program. They have full control over how much they want to put away and what they want to invest in. How much you save, if at all, is entirely up to you, as are investments. Accounts would be portable, so a person could take their savings with them if they change jobs. Economies of scale will keep costs low while also generating new business for the private sector. With regard to the state, this program is designed to be self-sustaining over time, and it will be participant funded. The state is not responsible for market performance. What a participant puts in is what they get out, plus or minus gains and losses in the market. The state simply plays the role of aggregating small businesses who otherwise would have to go out, pay retail for a retirement plan, operate it, choose the investments and providers, incur fiduciary liability, and fill out a great deal of paperwork when they could be using that time to keep their doors open instead. By affording workers access to a simple way to save for retirement, fewer households will need to rely on social services, ultimately saving taxpayer dollars. Research has found that Kansas could save over $51 million on public assistance programs between 2018 and 2032 if lower income retirees saved enough to increase their retirement income by just $1,000 more per year. In addition, Work and Save will grow a new generation of investors who can build those assets and invest in more complex financial service products down the road. Many states have taken action in moving forward on retirement security. Today, 14 states have enacted new programs for private sector workers, and many more states are well positioned to continue this work, with a number of states introducing and actively pursuing legislation this year. 3 states have been up and running for a few years now with their programs. Between the active states, there's over $420 million in assets under management, with nearly 430,000 funded accounts. It's important to note, as the Treasurer mentioned, that many of these workers are first-time savers who otherwise would have had no access to a payroll deduction retirement savings option. The success seen in already existing programs is a great example of how these programs can really make a difference for people trying to save their own money for retirement and save Kansas taxpayer dollars as well. We recognize the enormously positive impacts this legislation and program could have on the state of Kansas and its taxpayers. AARP is fully supportive of the passage and implementation of this bill, and we urge you to support House Bill 2586. Thank you again for having me today, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
And thank you for being with committee. We have one more written proponent and one more. Oh, actually, I think they are both written. It looks like we have written testimony from Dean Clancy and written testimony from Judy Davis Cole. Was anyone wishing to appear as a proponent? Seeing none, committee, are there questions for our proponents? I would have a few. I'll start. So, Ms. Ekman, thanks for your overview, and thank you for keeping everything short with the hour. I appreciate that. But to follow up just a little on the data that you have, and thanks for your call with me earlier to walk through things. On the page that shows the 51 million, you don't have to go through it now, but it would be interesting to see the assumptions behind the tax savings of 51 million if we could have that data. So I might ask you to follow up with that. If you have a super short explanation, that's great, but I'd be more interested in the details. And then if I'm looking at it right, on the next page with 420 million in assets, which is a meaningful number, and several accounts, if I'm looking at 430,000 accounts, would I be correct in assuming that the average account size is about $1,000 to get those 430,000 accounts to $420 million in terms of the magnitude?
Correct. The quick math, Mr. Chair, that sounds right to me. And it's important to note that, like I said, these are first-time savers. They're putting about $100 away a month on average.
So 100 a month, well, that would add up fairly quickly. So I might get over 1,000 without too much time, as that would work through. So, but a concern that I had expressed to you when we talked was competing with the private sector versus complementing the private sector, and the smaller accounts are more complementary, where it is harder to find those places to invest and save efficiently. So getting a handle on that is useful. You said there are 3 states up and running. 14 states were considering or had passed, or what was the status of the 14 states that you'd mentioned?
Sure. So 14 states have enacted legislation around this. There are a few different models, but there are 14 states that have actually enacted legislation. There are a number of states that are either pursuing active legislation this year, or they're studying the issue and considering legislation as well.
Thank you. Committee, other questions? Representative Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe just some further explanation. We know how CAPERS works. In other words, we've got people who invest. When in certain of my retirement funds, the company that I work for contracts with a very large investment company, and you get an opportunity to select the kind of risk you want, and maybe even some of the things that go in the portfolio. And then what they'd like to do is about twice a year have you have the ability to make adjustments to your portfolio. In this case, is the Department of Treasury contracting with some kind of firm to make these investment decisions and then interact with the employees if they choose to ask questions about the account?
Yes, and that's how we do the Learning Quest 529s and the ABLE accounts. Online, when you open an account, there's 5 or 6 choices, anything from very conservative, savings accounts, all the way to something much more aggressive. You can kind of choose, and you'll be able to put percentages into different buckets, so to speak. That's how we do our 529s. We work with American Century Investments out of Kansas City. We would do something similar, even if we did it as a joint with multiple states. We would pick an investment advisor. The other thing that we do in our office also is we have an advisory team of professionals, Kansans, that look at those results, and we have a group that does some study too to make sure that they're the right mutual fund or the right options for them as well. So it's similar to what with the CAPERS professional. This would be focused more on an individual.
And just to follow up, those are benchmarks sometimes against people like Morningstar or?
Right. We have those services, that benchmark for us. We use with Makita for our 529 accounts. We would have something similar for this as well.
Thank you very much.
Representative Riley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Again, mine's also for the treasurer. So can you explain a little bit more about how this payroll deduct would work? The employer is going to have to go along with that because there's a certain amount of accounting that happens on the payroll side to make that all work. So
Right.
How do you see that working?
Well, in most cases, and what we see with many organizations, it's all electronic. They use a payroll service. They would send us a tape. It should tape. That's what we used to do years ago. They'll send a file, and we would then put it. Our service provider would then put those deposits into the account. So when you get your paycheck, it would show that $100 or $20 went from your pay directly to the Work and Save account. And they could then access their account online or their quarterly statement and see that they've made a deposit on that particular payday.
Question, Representative Miller.
Mr. Treasurer, did you work with the chairman on his testimony on that last bill?
I didn't, so.
Sounded a lot like you.
There may be a coincidence there.
Other questions? You haven't, Representative Croft.
Does this have any requirement for, and maybe it's for somebody else, is there any requirement for the company to provide any input in this? Can they also contribute as well, or?
It's been a couple days since I've read the bill because I was prepared on Monday, but I don't believe they can contribute. I think that's the way the bill is written currently. So if they wanted to do that, they would need to contract with a financial organization. And what we actually heard, from the Oregon example, was that many banks originally didn't like this concept that the quote unquote the state was going to take into their business. What many banks and customers have found out is that they go to their banker and say, well, we've got to do this. And that was a mandatory program, but the bank would say, well, you can sign up with us and we can make that a 401k type where you as an employer can also contribute. If I were an employee and I had that kind of an option, I would jump on that much faster than this, to tell you the truth. But if I had no other option, this would be a good way to do that.
Thank you. And I have one question for Jessica, and then Ms. Cole, we know you are standing by, and I will get to you. But and it can be anyone that wants to. But can I roll to my own Roth at any time from this program? And Mr. Treasurer, you can respond.
I would anticipate that, and that if someone wants to roll it out to, another organization, they could, and it does allow rollovers into the program if they want to do that, so they can consolidate either way. But we would be ready, and that would be one of the things that we'd make sure when we set up our RFP that would be something that'd be allowed. It really is important that the individual can control the money themselves and do what they think is best. So
thank you. I haven't thought through the rolling in piece yet, so I may have questions.
I would guess there wouldn't be a lot of that. And again, that's something we can follow up with some of our other states to see what they do. But my guess, because again, if they did that, they'd probably do that with their current investment, and they'd have more choices on that as well. So
thank you. With the questions we've had so far, if either Jessica or Glenda have other thoughts, hang on to those. I'm going to take a moment and see if Ms. Cole has a few thoughts that she wished to share as a proponent.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The testimonies have been wonderful. I don't have a whole lot to add to the facts and figures that you've been presented. I am a volunteer for AARP, and I serve on the Executive Council for AARP of Kansas. And therefore, I do represent about 285,000 Kansans when I'm presenting. I think that workplace savings programs are a proven pathway. They've been available for so many years now, a proven pathway to financial security. And I firmly believe that every hardworking Kansan deserves to have a secure retirement. In addition to all of the other benefits that have already been listed, let me add one more that I think you should keep in mind, and that is the emotional and mental well-being of retirees that feel secure in their retirement. That I would like you to not underestimate that going forward. a sense of pride, a sense of self-reliance, not having to depend on state services, and to be independent. So please keep that in mind, and I really do highly encourage you to support this bill and to pass it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else that would wish to appear as a proponent of House Bill 2586? And is there anyone else online that was wishing to appear? Seeing none, are there further questions of our proponents or to our other conferees if there are additional answers to questions that you wish to clarify? And hearing none, thanks again to all of the conferees for the flexibility in schedules and for presenting. With that, is there anyone who might wish to appear as an opponent of House Bill 2586? And Ms. Braden, I did ask you to share a couple words that I had heard from another stakeholder. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Sandy Braden. I thank you today for taking my late testimony in opposition of House Bill 2568, if I've got the 86, which I'm dyslexic on that, but anyway. Chairman Johnson, a member of the House Insurance and Pension Committees, thank you. I am speaking here on behalf of NAFA, Kansas. NAFA has a national organization of about 20,000 licensed insurance agents and financial advisors across the country, and about 300 of those members are in Kansas. It's been a very interesting conversation, and we agree with everything that's been said, that there needs to be more emphasis on retirement and savings for our Kansans. And we encourage expanding retiring options and making it easier for Americans to plan and save. We appreciate the states that are looking for solutions, and we agree that this area deserves our attention. However, NAFA does not believe that a state-run program is the best way that competes with the private markets is the answer. There's already a strong, vibrant private sector retirement plan market, and that offers diverse, affordable options to individuals and employers. And one of the things that we would also ask you to take a look at is in 2019, the Secure Act passed on the federal level that provided some additional options for retirement plans provided by employers to smaller employers, and that including part-time employees, some tax credits for companies that provide some of these plans for smaller, as well as the opportunity to do things like association health plans are right now, that they would be, you could collectively put together like industries, like if you had a group of electricians, plumbers, et cetera, that could do a similar thing as a health association plan. This is a retirement plan. So I guess we would just caution you to take a look at these, take a look at the other states, what has happened in those states, and because some of the issues that come up are legal and how you work with ERISA, and there I'm way out on my skis on the ERISA comment. So, but I would just caution you that there is a good, vibrant market out there, and we'd be happy to work with the committee to provide some more information, as well as see if there are some other options we might work with, including additional information, communications, and promotions of saving plans. So thank you very much, and I will stand for questions.
Thank you for your testimony, and I know this has come up at a late hour with you having no time to prepare, but committee questions that you have? Seeing none, thank you for bringing the matter to our attention.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to appear as an opponent of House Bill 2586? Anyone wishing to appear neutral? And anyone else at all? And seeing none, we will close the hearing on 2586. An enormous thank you to the committee for your patience in both of the last two meetings, and again to the conferees. We are adjourned.